Hi, welcome to the Visionista podcast. I'm your host, Jessica East of Noir Marketing and PR. This podcast is for entrepreneurs where we talk about business and work-life balance. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Visionista podcast. I am here with my guest today, Catie Coyle. She is a hearing aid specialist at Premier Hearing Healthcare Center in Centerville, Ohio.
Hi.
And she is thrilled to be here today. So, do you want to tell everybody a little bit about like what you do and who you work with?
Sure. So I've been on the Premier team since 2016, but I've been a licensed hearing aid specialist since 2009. So as opposed to, focusing on diseases of the ear, that kind of thing, we focus on hearing loss that can be successfully treated with hearing aids specifically. So if I get somebody in and that's just not the best fit, if they really need to have a surgical consult or they're a good candidate for a cochlear implant, we work with a lot of ENTs in the area and we refer them out. My specialty is hearing aids, making sure that you've got, best fit for the person, for their lifestyle, and also their hearing loss.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay. So our topic today is common sense and professionalism. How this came to be, for those of you listening, we have brunch with some friends, and a few weeks ago, this topic came up, and I was like, crap, this would make a perfect podcast. A lot of what I cover when I'm giving PR tips with people is professionalism on social media and in the public arena, because there are a lot of people that say a lot of really dumb things online, and then they can find themselves on the wrong end of some real negative public opinions for whatever they've just said. And the conversation started, some of it I've been doing marketing and PR for a really long time, probably 15 years, maybe between 13 and 15 years. I was just a straight graphic designer before we started doing marketing and PR. So some of it I think is just, I'm so used to my field. Sometimes, anybody who has a field and a specialty that they operate in daily and they have for a long time, they kind of forget that maybe not everybody else knows what they know. However, I think that's some of it, but I also think that there's a level of professionalism and common sense that I don't know why we don't have it. For instance, there is a lovely little hot dog stand. I love it so much. I grew up, we would go there like once a week. It was in the tiny little town where I lived. New owner, and he regularly takes to his Facebook page to complain about his staff. Now, this is the public business Facebook page. This is like his own, where he's just talking to his friends and family. This is he's posting as the business saying, well, we're not going to be able to serve everybody until close tonight. Our grill's going to close 3 hours early because we just can't get people to come in. And it sounds like a mess. And I'm reading these things, and he does this seriously once a week. This is not like he got angry one time and went off. It's a regular occurrence. Sounds like a mess. I would never go there.
Right.
Because it sounds like there's no one to serve me and I can have like French fries and water and that's it.
But what you just said is so critical. I would never go there.
Exactly. And so, he's doing himself a disservice. He thinks, I think, that he's letting people know, oh, we're closing early tonight. But saying, hey, due to unforeseen circumstances, we're closing at 8 instead of 11. He's got this whole mini novella about how crappy his staff are. And then you have all these dinglings that like tag their children that work there, which is another thing. If you're going to pay children to work there, can you complain if they call off in the summer? Anyway, I digress. But this was the conversation that kind of kicked off our
Mhm.
conversation.
Mhm.
And you had a lot of really great thoughts about
Oh,
that. So, first things first, common sense and professionalism being tied together. We kind of surmise that they are a little
oh,
bit.
I think they have to be,
Mhm.
right? I mean, it's interesting too because common sense is such a broad spectrum. So, just speaking to common sense, sometimes I want to make sure that I'm being intentional about providing some grace, just because I
Mhm.
also recognize that even um, the most thoughtful among us sometimes just have those brain floopies. What's that word? I don't know. But,
Yeah.
where things just kind of disappear. And I was actually
Or a
just
bad day.
recently, yeah, I was reading an article about mental load and the impact that has on our cognitive ability to think through things. So,
Oh.
the occasional lapse in judgment feels very different to me than a pattern of lack of common sense, lack of professionalism.
Mhm.
And when we were talking about it at brunch, I had said, I feel like some of it is, I don't know, just something you're born with. Some
Yeah.
people just seem more geared that way. But I also think some of it is making sure that you have attention to detail, but policies and procedures in your life, rules that you follow,
Mhm.
and it just seems like some people don't have any rules and they do
Yeah.
whatever they want to do.
Because that's how I feel. That's my opinion. I'm allowed to share my
Right.
opinion. Yes,
Right.
sir, you are. You are 100% allowed to share your opinion. But if you say something and
Mhm.
people find your opinion like gross and offensive to who they are as people,
Right.
they may choose to take their business
Yeah.
elsewhere. Like this little hot dog stand guy.
Right.
He is sharing his experience and he is more than welcome to do so. And as I'm reading that, as a
Mhm.
prior customer, I'm like, oh my God, this sounds like a mess. I don't think I want to go there right now.
Well, and without going into details, Jess, you may remember, I want to say last year, there was another company who was posting some political thoughts on social media.
Yay.
And
Which one? Take your pick.
I know. I know if I say what field it was in, you'll know exactly who I'm talking about.
I already know exactly who you're
Okay,
talking about because
good.
we're like this.
Right. We're having
Katie
this
is my
psychic
sister
connection.
from another mister.
Yes.
So
Yeah. We go way back. But I remember when that whole thing happened, not only did his feelings on several topics not coincide with my own, but I also just remember thinking, how stupid are you? I mean, just stupid. If you're going to be a horrible person, at least have the intelligence to not put it on social media. I mean, it was just so bizarre.
Mhm.
And
And
again, I just feel like it's a lack of maybe understanding, um, but also a lack of humility,
mhm,
you know, because at some point someone has said this wasn't a good idea.
mhm,
And there's just no humility to say, gosh, someone else may know better than me. I'm going to say whatever I want to say, you
mhm,
know. And that particular guy, that was rough for their business.
mhm.
I don't know what happened with the hot dog fella.
Well, I'm not sure either. A friend of mine just went there last weekend and I didn't post because we're foodies. We post our
Right.
pictures and brunch and things. I did not put it on the public post because I am a professional. I sent her a message and I was like, oh, how was your experience? Like, I've been
Mhm.
hearing some things. And she said that it was fine. And I'm like, okay. So that was not a day that he had been complaining about being short staffed. But this place is a half an hour from my house. So it's not like I can just drive by at any point. If I'm going to go there, it's because I'm intentionally getting in my car and
Right.
driving 30 minutes to go have this hot dog and this experience and everything. So if it was a little closer to home, I might pop by
Mhm.
if it was a place I was passing on a regular basis, but it's not. I don't live there
Right.
anymore. It's a destination
Right.
meal. And
it's an intention. Like you have to be intentional about it.
and there is
And those are the
nothing else
things.
around. So
Right.
if I go and I'm stuck, I'm screwed. I have to
Well,
drive
but
30 minutes back
that's what I mean.
home.
Like that's an intentional thing. And yet you've been intentional about not going there.
Mhm.
And I think that when it comes to social media in particular, especially marketing, which is what you do,
Mhm.
9 times out of 10, I feel very strongly that people should be active on social media. I think it's much more important than a website.
Mhm.
Um, Not that a website's not important. I just mean, that's where you're interrelational. But are there some cases when it would be better to not be on social media than to be listing your woes? Yes,
Mhm.
because you do more damage to your brand than positive.
Mhm.
And it is startling to me that some people don't realize that.
That's
I don't.
actually Tuesday tip for like this next week or the week after is that you don't always have to have a response, which I think is
Mhm.
counterintuitive to people because, if you're accused of something or you think someone's going to accuse you
Mhm.
of something, you want to get ahead of it and put out
Yeah.
your own narrative. And sometimes that's really just not a good idea. I have another client who works with local municipalities, and um, one of the local municipalities that they worked with, someone, because it's all public money, someone had sent them a very angry accusatory letter suggesting that someone who worked for my client's company was like double dipping. Like they were employed by this municipality and also employed by my client who had a contract with the municipality. Now, that wasn't exactly the case. They were going off of like financial reports and
Mhm.
like making some inferences that were
Right.
not accurate. So
Mhm.
the person had been employed by the municipality at one point, but they were no
Mhm.
longer employed there. They were only working for my client. And when the municipality sent a notice to my client, like, hey, just FYI, BT dubs, this is going on. So, in
Mhm.
case you hear anything about yourself, this is why, like, this is the situation. We're handling it. It's a
Sure.
non issue, but we need to figure out how best we need to handle. So, of course, I get a call. It was like noon, 1 o'clock. It was pretty early, in the day, midway
Right.
through. We still had some time. And he was like, we need to get on this. We need to say something, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well,
Right.
and so I started asking a lot of questions, and many of those questions he did not have an answer for. And I said, well, here's the thing. Absolutely, you can go and say something,
Mhm.
but I don't think it's going to be helpful in this situation because you still have a lot of questions that you yourself don't know. So, what are you going to say if you make some sort of half-baked statement and then people
Right.
ask you questions, you're like, oh, then you look
Right.
like an idiot. And that's not good for your
Right.
business. You never want your business to look like an idiot. You
Right.
never want to look like a moron. You never want your business to look like it's run by morons. So if you can't answer every question that could possibly be asked, maybe that's not the best time to
Right. Then sit down.
yes, just pour yourself a stiff drink, calm down,
Right.
and see what happens.
Right.
And because I am the professional that I am, by the end of the day, it had pretty much been sorted out. The big
Right.
hubbub that they thought was going to explode did not.
Right.
And then my client was saved by making some big public statement that would have drawn more attention
Exactly.
to this thing. And then people would have been like, oh, well, this sounds bad. Well, we
Right.
don't like governmental double dipping and this is bad. I mean, because there's
Mhm.
just people and budgets when it's your tax dollars. That's like a whole other
Right.
level of I will cut you. What are you doing
Right.
with my money? So you have to be really careful how you address those things. So we were
Right.
able to avoid potentially bringing more attention to it and making it worse by
Mhm.
not saying anything at all. And
Mhm.
whenever people, well, I have to make a statement, I always bring that up. That's my go to. I'm like, do you though? Do you
Right.
have to make a statement right now?
And I also
Maybe
think
you
that
could make it
sometimes
in
you
an
have to.
hour.
Right. And sometimes you have to take a step back. Um, Sometimes it's not, do I respond or do I not respond? Sometimes it's, do I respond right now when I'm feeling defensive?
Mhm.
Because that has a tendency to have a lot more aggression behind it. In fact, quick little story, not the company I currently work for, but a company I once worked for. We had rows and rows and rows of glowing reviews, and we had one negative review. And truthfully, the person who posted the negative review was just a
Nasty?
Looney Tune. I mean, there's just no way around it.
You can't please all the people all the time.
You just can't. But this particular person was just not a pleasant person. So anywho, rows and rows and rows of good reviews, one bad reviews. And the person that I worked for at that time was very quick to want to respond. And I said, I'm going to encourage you to write your response out and send it to me and let me review it before you do that. And I just held on to it for a couple days.
Mhm.
And I said, okay, let's just do another one. And the second time there was a response without the, yeah, well, kind of implied defensive, whatever. And
Mhm.
I think that's really hard to do because we want to defend ourselves. But I know for myself as a consumer, if I'm reading reviews for, let's say, a restaurant and there's glowing reviews and one bad review, that doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
If the one bad review has a really nasty response from the restaurant, that bothers me.
Mhm.
So those are the things. I just think we have to be intentional about sometimes removing those emotions from our responses. And if we can't do that, then now's not the time to respond.
Mhm. And that works brilliantly, not only for social applications, but also email applications. I can't
Sure.
tell you how many times I have received a pretty shitty email.
Right.
And I've been like, oh, and I'm just ready to go to town. And I was like, deep
Mhm.
breath. I hit mark as unread and I don't look at it again for,
Smart.
depending on what time of day it is, maybe a couple hours, maybe I save it till the next day. I don't think that tips people off. If you're listening at home thinking like, oh my gosh, well, you didn't get right back to it. I mean, how many times do we email someone and they take several hours to a
Right.
day or two to respond to us
Right.
because they're busy?
So
You're not the only person they're emailing. Maybe they've got phone calls, Zoom calls, in-person meetings. They've had to travel somewhere. Maybe they're out of the office. Maybe there's some sort of work that has to be done. So there's, questions that they have to answer on their end before they can respond to you. So I don't think it's bad at all to take a
right.
minute. I mean, you're mad as hell, but they
Right.
don't need to know that
Right. And
you're mad.
I think that's a learned skill, which is something um I do. I don't think that's instinct. I think the instinct is to immediately defend yourself.
Mhm.
I think learning to step back is a learned skill. And I think that's something that I've grown a lot, over the last, we'll say, decade. If I could learn how to do that well, like in my marriage, I'd be all set. But for emails and social media,
We're good.
I'm there.
Well, and that brings up a good point. That actually segues into the next question that I wanted to ask and touch on. Those soft skills. You see that in job postings. You hear employers and HR departments talking about soft skills. We can teach how to use our filing system, but we need somebody with those soft skills. Soft skills, common sense, I think they can be taught.
Mhm.
How should someone approach that? Because obviously you don't want to go in and be like, hey, you need to learn how to do this. I mean, or maybe that's your style and you're blunt and you're like, hey, you need to learn how to respond to emails without being a turd. It's possible. But how would you suggest, you said if you could learn to do that earlier, how would you have been receptive to have somebody teach you those skills 10 years ago or 15 years ago
Oof,
or 20 years
really
ago?
good question. So, before I went into this industry, when I was still in college, I worked for a jewelry store for a while, and that was really fun. And then I got the bright idea that I was going to work for a children's home, which
Mhm.
no longer is there. So I feel confident that I could talk about this. But one of the counselors at that children's home. I was a supervisor for the visitation center, and one of the counselors got really upset about the way something was handled one time. And truthfully, she didn't have all the information, and she didn't need to have all the information because it was not, it was someone else's information that didn't need to be shared. But in any way,
yours to share with her.
Right. And she sent a very aggressive email to me and CC'd my boss's boss on it, which was just so unnecessary. Don't do that. Handle stuff one-on-one before you just bring in everything under the sun. But in my youth, keep in mind, I was about 20, I responded pretty quickly.
Please tell me you have this printed out somewhere.
I know, right? The truth is, everything that I said was true, but I needed to have not responded. And my boss called me into his office and said, "What is going on?" Because he got a call from his boss. And honestly, I was embarrassed into never doing that again. So,
so yours was negative feedback that was
I had to be humiliated into never repeating that mistake again. I'm not saying that we need to just start knocking on doors and saying, "Jess and I have decided you are doing this all wrong," and just humiliate them into doing it the right way. But that definitely did it for me. But I also think no one had ever told me, for us, like you and I had a Facebook page the year it came out, because before that I had MySpace. And when I get sometimes those like memories that pop up, they're super cringy, right? You know that word? Because I think, why did I put that on social media? But A, I was 19 or 20 or whatever. And B, social media was a new concept, right? So I think sometimes we have to be sensitive to the fact that for some people, they're at that place without the experience that we've had of, working through that. So they're doing all that cringy stuff now, and they're business owners. And so part of it may actually be that they don't know better.
And that's a good point. That's a very good point. I mean, up until just a few years ago, legally, the law is always a little slow to keep up with modernization of civilization, whether it's healthcare or human rights or social media, electronic stuff. It takes a while, and we have now entered the stage of law where things that you say digitally, whether it's a text message, a voicemail, a post on your page, on your social, a tweet, a retweet in some cases, all of those things are admissible in court. Like if that proves someone's case, let's say that in the case of this aforementioned person who had some issues last summer, let's say that he fired someone and they came back and sued him for discrimination. And he was like, well, that's just stupid. I don't discriminate. But then this person went back and pulled all of those social media posts. They could, in fact, win their case because they would say, well, for someone who doesn't discriminate, he sure has a lot of posts that he's willing to publicly say how much he doesn't like women, how much he doesn't like people who have a certain political view or a certain religious view or a certain skin color. This dude just he went to town. He nuked the heck out of himself. But he's got big pockets. So people have people have mostly forgiven him by this point. I drove by a certain private I drove by a certain public school or private school yesterday on the way in between meetings and saw that his name was very proudly displayed on the scoreboard still. So he can write big checks so he can be forgiven by the people who want to cash his checks. If you cannot write big checks,
but as a consumer, you will never get my business.
Yes. Well, I mean, last summer, I have been working professionally in Dayton for 20 years now because I'm old as hell. I have known about this person. and the way he treats people for 13 to 15 years. So this is just who he is as a person. Honestly, I'm shocked that it's taken so long to come out about like how he operates and how he treats people. But now that it's out, people can't ignore it. I knew it a long time ago. So there is no way, I would never work for him. I would never do business for him. I would never have him, he's in the service industry. I would never have him come to my house to do any work. So, I knew this a long time ago, but, he did hit a snag with a lot of people. I don't know where he is today with all of that, but I can tell you, a lot of our listeners, I don't think have deep pockets where they can pay people off and do big ad campaigns to get back in good graces. So it's really, really important, and know thyself. That's one of my huge pillars for marketing. Know thyself. So if you know that you may not be able to trust yourself saying some of these things on social, responding, like that and ripping somebody's head off. I mean, if you're a hothead or if you're not, like deep down, if you worry that that could be a thing for you, there is no shame in having somebody else take over your social.
And I also think it's fair to say, if you don't have a lot of experience with social media and you're not really sure if you have the right instincts, go ahead and hire it out until you figure it out. Because if, as it turns out, you don't have good instincts for how to handle things, you're going to do so much more damage. And I don't want that to
small, you might not be able to recover from the damage.
Right. So if you're not sure, but you recognize that social media is an important aspect of marketing, just hire it out so you know that it will be handled appropriately. And then, as time goes on, if you think, no, I've got a handle on this, fine. You can start to integrate yourself a little bit. But there's been so many outside of just the ones that you've shared. In fact, I'll give you another example that is not a negative, right? It's not someone giving negative information. It is someone who has a local business that I love and has the most long-winded post I've ever seen in my life.
Oh, yeah. So they need some best practices.
Oh, they just need help. And will sometimes say in their post that they don't know how to do social media. And I think, well, if you know that, then get the help that you need. It just drives me crazy. And then recently I was at this person's establishment and asked a question. And he said, well, I answered that on social media, but I don't think people ever read to the bottom. And I thought, because people don't have time for that.
They did not plan on checking your post out of the library today.
Right. But see, to me, that feels like common sense. But I think sometimes, again, to those soft skills, what is common sense because I'm just such a genius, and what is common sense because I've been doing this for so long,
No, that's a very good point. So
well, thank you.
that is why we're chatting today. So definitely some of these social media soft skills that we're talking about, public facing PR soft skills, can be learned if you are new to the game or feel uncomfortable with it or are a bit concerned about perhaps your temper. Hire someone else to do it, even on like a very part-time basis. Social media does not need to be a full-time job. Maybe don't hire an intern right out of college because they're going to lack some of those polished professionalism skills too. But you could hire somebody who's been working for 5 years, 10 years and can respond respectfully and professionally. Honestly, for me, I learned the most about dealing with difficult people the job I had right before I started my own business, because we worked for a public entity. It was taxpayer funded. So, if like I mentioned before, when people are talking about their tax dollars, everybody has an opinion.
Yeah.
Half the time it's very angry.
Yes.
Um, we used to put out a magazine 4 times a year. They still put it out now, but I think it's twice a year. And it was like 30 pages just printed on like newsprint. It wasn't anything fancy. And then it was cheaper for us to drop ship it, which means, it just goes out to everybody.
Right.
Every postal customer in the zip codes that were in the county that we serviced would get one of these things. It was cheaper to do that than it was to print less and try to manage a mailing list. So that is what we did. Every single time we had one of those magazines go out, we would get phone calls, emails, social media messages, whether it was like just like a direct message or whether it was some crappy comment underneath, like, hey guys, come out and look at the bunnies. Like, some crappy comment about this magazine that we were putting out. Well, I don't need this. I don't want this. This is a waste of my money. Like, whatever. I'm sure you can imagine. And so for me, watching how there was another lady on the team who handled like copy and PR, watching how she would respond to really just idiocy and meanness, watching how she responded to those things taught me so much in how to deal with really bad reviews, bad conversations, outright like attacks on you personally and your intelligence and how smart you are at your job. And I used to get so upset. And she's like, who cares? Like, they just don't understand, like, whatever. And so she would say something. And I think she told one lady that she could like donate it to a doctor's office or like the pet store so they could use it for like their bird cages or something. Like, I don't know, something. It was like funny as hell and snarking, but it was like, so if you don't want it, why don't you recycle it? Here are some recycling locations, or you can donate it. Here are some donation ideas. It was kind of like sidestepping the original anger in the first place and like, oh, well, here are some things you can do about it besides sending shitty messages to people that you've never met before. So I learned so much. I was there for probably 5 or 6 years, maybe. But watching how she handled all that, I was like, yep, that's a really good way to say that. And I think that just got me thinking about different ways to say things honestly, but politely and professionally. So like, I see you, I hear you. I still think you're full of shit, but here's my answer. Like there's a way to do that and not escalate the situation.
Well,
So,
and I think you hit the nail on the head too when you said like people come after you personally, and so you feel the need. I at least always felt the need to internalize that, and that's A, not necessary, but B, also super not healthy. And that is a skill I continue to work on. I have to give some credit. In my youth, I was very non-confrontational. And now I probably err too far on the other side, where I'm like, well, let's talk about it. Everything doesn't have to be talked about, Catie. But when I worked for the jewelry store in college, my boss was just one of the coolest women I'd ever met. She was tough as nails, but I loved her. And she was actually my maid of honor in my wedding.
Aww.
And we're still really good friends, but she took no crap. She just didn't. And she could have someone be very aggressive to her and then turn around and be super like sing-songy. And up until that point, I had never learned how to do that. I would internalize that aggression. And probably one of the best examples of this that still cracks me up to think about was a gentleman had called, and truthfully, he actually had called the wrong jewelry store because there were like 5 in the mall at the time. But anyway, she was trying to explain that and he would not stop yelling. And he kept cursing her out and just calling her every name in the book. And she could not get a word in. And she finally said, Sir, I'm sorry to talk over you, but I'm going to ask you to not use that language with me again. And if you do, I'm going to disconnect the call. And he said something profane, and she said, oh, there it was, bye-bye, and just hung up. And then just unplugged the phone and was like, he'll probably call back. We'll just unplug it for now, and went on doing something else. And I thought, how on earth do you get just obliterated and not take it personally? But she just didn't. It wasn't about her.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved that. And I love that she stayed so light and cheerful, which probably made him more angry.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I love that she drew a line in the sand and said, you know, if you continue to treat me in such a way, I'm going to take away your ability to do so. And then she did. She followed up on it. You know, I have to wonder if that guy thought twice before cursing out a stranger on the phone the next time.
It was just so lovely. Oh, there was another one. Okay, bye-bye. Hung up.
So it seems like both of us can agree that learning those soft skills came from having people around us that we could learn from, who kind of modeled that behavior.
Sure.
So, you know, if soft skills, because a lot of companies are looking for those soft skills when they're hiring, we're willing to train how to do our inventory or how to use our programs or drive our trucks, but we need those soft skills. You know, maybe people should kind of think about that to say, we're willing to model those soft skills for you and work with you for 6 months, 12 months, 24 months until you have a good grasp of that. Like, I think maybe that's something that we should look at differently in the corporate world.
Totally.
We'll model that too for you, and we'll show you how to do that.
And when you have an employee who is naturally gifted in some of those areas, take advantage of it, but not in the negative way. You know, I used to work for a guy who said, put the right butt in the right seat. And I loved that. But if you have someone who has a natural skill set in that area, my goodness, let them run with it. You know, sometimes I think, especially the longer we've been in our position, if there's someone that comes on board, there's a little bit of pride that gets in the way of letting them do something that should be ours because we have the most experience. But I think that's important. You know, if you have someone who's naturally gifted in those areas, my Lanta, give them the reins, put them in charge of training, do something. Mm-hmm. If you don't have someone like that, hire it out. I honestly think there's probably room, you know, like we talk about consultants, like there's consultants for different kinds of things. Soft skills consultants has got to be a thing where they can bring people in and say, okay, here's what you do. Because I just think common sense is often something that we assume is, you know, inherent. And I feel like oftentimes it's something that comes from just life. Mm-hmm. And if you haven't been in the right place at the right time, you maybe missed some of that. And if you need to be taught, you've just got to have enough humility to say, no one taught me. So I need to find somebody who's good at it and say, please teach me how to do this.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's fair. You know, there's a lot of people in our generation and generations younger who don't have parents at home for a myriad of different reasons. I've got 2 teen daughters, and I swear half of their friends do not have a mom at home. Like, they have no mom. One of them has substance abuse problems, and they don't know exactly where she is. The other one, actually 2 of them, one passed away of like an illness, another one committed suicide. So they just don't have moms, and they haven't had them since they were very little, like 2nd, 3rd grade. We're talking small, you know, children. So I think understanding that maybe not everyone has had the same background and the same, you know, privilege of family that you've had, or, you know, a mentor. I think having a mentor is very important, whether it's an ongoing relationship with somebody that you have for years and years, or whether it's just in short little bursts. You know, when I was starting my business, I asked a lot of questions to a lot of other business owners, some successful and some unsuccessful, because who
Mhm.
better to tell you what not to do than
Right.
somebody who just like blew it all and is like, oof, never do that. That's what I did. And the whole thing just fell down, you know? So I asked a lot of people, and I had a lot of people to kind of mentor me through starting and what to do and what not to do. And I did that pretty regularly for a couple of years. You know, now I'm pretty well set, but
Mhm.
as we go, we're getting ready to really ramp up and go through a big period of growth, which is exciting and terrifying all at the same time. I find myself reaching back out to people like, hey, so how do you know when it's time to bring someone else on? When is it a wave? When is it just like life and you need to pull somebody in? So I still reach out and ask people when there's things I need to know. So I think that learning from other people, and not all of them are in my industry, you know,
Sure.
business owners are not necessarily like good business is not necessarily like just for marketing. You know,
Right.
there's a lot of other businesses where the same principles apply. So I think, sorry, that's my calendar. I think finding people you can talk to and who you feel comfortable enough having some of those conversations with,
Mhm.
I think is key to making some changes in your own life and learning how to do better for yourself.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Love it.
Well, I think we've covered all the things that I really wanted to chat about today. I know that this comes up a lot. I do Tuesday tips every Tuesday, and a lot of what I cover is just small little bite size,
Mhm.
you know, PR tips when you're doing social, or PR tips when you're just out talking to people about things. So I think this is helpful. I think that a lot of people have a lot of questions, and hopefully they'll feel comfortable asking those questions, seeking some help, seeking a mentor.
Mhm.
You know, whether that mentor is older or younger than you,
Sure.
that doesn't matter. So if you had one last thought to leave with people, what would that be?
Boy, that's gonna be tough. I think my one last thought, if we focus on social media, is going to be leave pretty much any and all negativity off of your business page.
Yes.
Just leave it off. Doesn't belong there. Go see your counselor, talk to your priest, but leave it off your business page.
And I think that is pretty perfect. I don't think I could have summed it up better myself.
Oh, no.
All right.
Well,
Well,
thanks
thank
for having me
you.
on, Jess. This was fun.
Well, thank you for chatting with me today, Catie. I'll have Katie's LinkedIn link at the bottom of the info. So if you're like, oh my gosh, she's brilliant, I think she's brilliant. But if you would like to connect with her, you may do so. So in the meantime, this has been the Visionista podcast.